Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 4 books of Confucian learning. We will continue to explore the Analects today. And I suppose, as a book, the Analects can sometimes seem like a bundle of fragments, bits and pieces from the lives of Confucius and his students and the people from his times. But I would suggest that the Analects actually offers us toolbox of resources to help us think and reflect. The words of Confucius and his students can offer us fresh perspectives, timely reminders, and perhaps even talk some good sense into us. So in this last session, I should say, on the Analects, we'll explore some passages from the book relating to the exemplary person, what's known in Chinese as the Junzi. Now, the exemplary person, probably the term crops up fairly commonly. The exemplary person here is someone who is learning and practicing the way of the highest learning. And they're held up to be a positive role model by Confucius. They're often sort of contrasted with the small or petty person. The small or petty person is someone who indulges their selfish desires and just goes along with their negative habits. So the exemplary person and the small or petty person, they're basically two archetypes, if you will, two teaching tools. Now, no one is 100% perfect or 100% imperfect. There'll be days when we are exemplary and there'll be times when we're less than exemplary. Confucius in the Analects encourages us to follow the exemplary part of ourselves. So we'll look at some passages that relate to the exemplary person on a few topics. And the topics are, they relate to our worries, what we think about, what we're worried about, our words and our actions, as well as our attitude to service and the bigger picture of our life. So without further ado, we'll start on the first topic. What are you worried about? Now, we know that people can worry a lot. In the Analects, we find Confucius sort of advising us on what we should and shouldn't be worrying about. Confucius said, don't worry that you have no position. Worry about how you can qualify for one. Don't worry that people don't know you. Look for some reason to become known. Now, this might bring to mind, scramble for a high-flying job. People might be after a prominent position in an organization or company or some leadership role within the community. And those positions often come with various trappings of worldly success, like extensive influence, high earning power. Sometimes they might even come with a luxury home and cars and expensive holidays. Now, throughout human history, wealth, prestige, and power have been seductive and alluring advantages across all human cultures. People persist in the pursuit of those things. And the struggle for wealth and prestige and power can be fiercely competitive, and that's why they call it the rat race. And the fact is that some people will inevitably miss out on a plum job, and people tend to worry about missing out. Now, Erin Klein has written in her book called Little Sprouts and the Tao of Parenting. She writes that the ancient Chinese philosophers, like Confucius and the Analects, they talk more about human flourishing, about virtue and fulfillment and happiness, much more than what might be termed worldly success. And this is because those ancient Chinese philosophers recognize that very often people who lead the happiest and most fulfilling lives, those who really flourish as human beings, they're not necessarily the ones who achieve the success that's measured by wealth and prestige and power. If they do possess those things, their happiness and flourishing are not dependent on them. Now, it's not to say that the Chinese philosophers disregarded material well-being. Not the case at all. But they knew that there was a difference. There's a difference between being able to provide for our family and having the highest salary income. A difference between being valued and appreciated and enjoying power and prestige. The Chinese philosophers believed that measuring success by wealth and prestige and power doesn't take into account all the marks of a real successful life or a life well lived. For example, at funerals, we'll probably never hear anyone remember or eulogize the deceased by saying what his income was, how many cars and boats he had, or how he crushed the competition in his field of work. The Chinese philosophers understood human flourishing in moral terms. Those who have truly realized their potential are those who have the most fully cultivated virtues like benevolence or humanity and compassion. And they're the ones who have found their true calling or vocation in life. They're able to take their place in the world by doing something that brings joy and meaning to their life and to lives of others. And it is those things, not wealth and power and prestige, that enables a person to truly flourish and be fulfilled. The true marks of a life well lived can never be measured in terms of things like earning power or having prestigious jobs. Instead, the Chinese philosophers like Confucius would tell us that the successful life is measured in how a person treats another, how they love and are loved by their family and friends, and what they do to make the world a kinder, more gentle, a more humane, and more beautiful place. Now, when we miss out on a great role or some high-flying job, the Confucius in the Analects offers some constructive advice. We should be concerned about not with securing a job, but whether we qualify for the job in the first place. Do we really deserve such a job? Have we got what it takes to merit the role? Because very often it's not simply about being able to do the job, but whether we can use that role to make a difference, a positive difference to the organisation and to the community. We might have some knowledge, skills and experience, but do we also have the vision and the integrity that the role calls for? If we haven't ticked all the boxes of the job criteria this time, Confucius would encourage us to keep working on ourselves, and particularly to develop our ethical character. For example, can we be trusted with all of the responsibilities that come with that job? And can we deliver on what we promise? And this can make all the difference between one job applicant and the next. Professor Li Bingnang also points out that one doesn't necessarily have to have a high-ranking position or high-paying job to make a meaningful contribution to an enterprise or organisation. I'm sure we can all think of someone who has gone above and beyond the call of duty, and they're probably not even the CEO. So we can understand why Confucius tells us to focus on qualifying for a position and not to worry about having a position in the first place. Now, other than the social standing and authority that comes with the top job, there's also the matter of fame and renown. Most people want to be famous these days. It's generally considered an indicator of professional success. Others may not pursue fame as such, but they would still want to be recognized in some way. It could be being honored for their contribution to their company or industry, or being applauded for volunteering their time and expertise within the community. When people miss out on an award or accolade, they might naturally feel upset for being overlooked. Now, what would Confucius have to say? Again, he would encourage us to think and reflect on whether we have anything worth being known for. And don't worry that people don't know you. Look for some reason to become known. Let me share with you a story of Lord Moore of the state of Zhou. Now, Lord Moore was inclined to be self-disciplined, and he wouldn't indulge in fine food or luxury clothes. While he was strict with himself, he was generous and magnanimous, generous towards others. Lord Moore cared and loved for the population as if they were his children. And such unity within the state of Zhou earned the respect of larger states like Lu and Wei. And the state of Zhou was also not threatened by states like the states of Qi and Chu. When Lord Moore passed away, all of the nation mourned, and even the neighbouring states expressed their condolences by paying respects. Everyone refrained from music while grieving over the loss of such a benevolent leader, and it was a year before the sounds of the lute or zither could be heard. The Han Dynasty philosopher and statesman Jia Yin commented that those who are compassionate will be loved. Those who help others will be blessed with fortune. And this demonstrates how the ancients developed their moral character and naturally achieved the love and adoration of the people. They naturally achieved the love and adoration of the people without pursuing popularity. If we happen to achieve fame, we can think about how our fame could be used for the sake of bringing benefit to others in a meaningful way. How we can use our renown to contribute positively to the lives of others. For example, by giving voice to the disadvantaged within the community, bringing awareness to worthy causes. Later on in the Analects, Confucius reiterates that a person shouldn't worry about not being known or understood by others. The Master said, don't worry about others not knowing you. Worry about your own want of ability. The exemplary person blames their own lack of ability. They don't blame others for not recognizing them. Instead of blaming others for not appreciating us or our talents, we're advised to worry about our own want of ability or lack of ability. In fact, the lack of recognition now might be a sign that we need to improve ourselves in some way. So we should focus on our areas of weakness and not be concerned about whether or not we're capable of, we should focus on our areas of weakness and actually be concerned about whether or not we're able to make a meaningful contribution. At the end of the day, whether or not we're recognized for that contribution is really beside the point. Confucius tells us that instead of being concerned that no one recognizes our merits, we should worry instead that we may fail to recognize others and their merits. Now, if we fail to recognize the strengths of others, we should certainly be worried because we could stand to suffer great detriment and disadvantage. For example, we won't be able to appreciate and learn from the strengths of others. We might fail to recognize the good teachers around us. We might fail to distinguish between those friends that will help us improve our ethical character and those friends who will diminish our ethical character. Or we could even engage or promote the glib talkers over the honest and dutiful employees. So there are many disadvantages should we fail to recognize the strengths of others. Well, if we take you back to the highest learning, there was a Lord Moore of the state of Ting, and he once swore an oath. Here's a map of the spring and autumn period. We can see Ting here, sort of towards the left of the center. He was, sometimes he's referred to as the Duke Moore of Ting. And he swore this oath, which is recorded in the highest learning. Suppose there is a resolute minister who has a devoted appearance, who appears to be very loyal and is without unusual skills, but with a mind fond of the good. When others have skills, it is as if he himself has them. When others are accomplished and sage-like, he loves them in his heart more than his words express, and is truly able to accept them. Such a person would be able to preserve my descendants and the masses, and it may be that he too would be of benefit. Suppose, however, there is a man who is jealous and envious when others have skills, such that he hates them, and when others are accomplished and sage-like, he opposes them, such that they cannot advance, and is truly unable to accept them. Employing such a person would not be able to protect my descendants and the masses, but would also be dangerous. In this passage, we're presented with two characters. Lord Moore is talking about individuals at his court, ministers. Now, there's a minister who is cultivated. They're accommodating of others. They can get along harmoniously. They rejoice in the merits of others. They, see others, the abilities of others, their strengths, as though they're own. They don't feel envious or jealous, and they really love and support those with talent and virtue. More than words can express. They'll put those people forward for promotion. And they are, therefore, a benefit to the people and the state because of their role. Now, if we contrast that to the minister who is small or petty-minded, they're in it for themselves. So they find it hard to accommodate others, even to get along with others. They view the abilities of others when people have strengths. Well, that's a cause for resentment for them. And they're highly envious. In fact, they would even obstruct those with virtue and talent from serving the ruler. And they're therefore considered a danger to the people and the nation. Now, it's one thing to be able to recognize the strengths of others, to appreciate the strengths of others. And as we can see, that it's not an academic exercise. For an individual in a position of power in a state, serving the public service, their decisions on a day-to-day basis can either bring benefit or disbenefit to the wider community, the people at large, the rest of the state. And their attitudes can make such a big difference, whether they're cultivated, whether they love the good, and they're committed to the way of the highest learning. Cultivating their ethical character can make a world of difference. And, being able to appreciate and support, appreciate the strengths of others and go on to support them. That's being able to appreciate the strengths of others, being able to recognize, that's the very first step. And it's a critical step if those key essential people serving the state as the officials within the community are then able to support and advance those with talent and virtue, so they too can serve the state and bring benefit to the people. So it's not an academic exercise at all. Now, I wonder if you've ever thought about what Confucius would worry about. In the Analects, Confucius articulates 4 worries. Let's take a look at what Confucius worries about. Master said that I have not cultivated virtue, that I've not imparted my learning, that I'm unable to do what is right, that I'm unable to correct my shortcomings. These are my worries. As a consummate teacher, Confucius's foremost concern is that he has not cultivated virtue. Now, he's obviously leading by example, as the best teachers do. And the Analects shows Confucius as conscious of actively working on his own ethical character. As they say, all good things involve work and effort. So that's his first worry, that he hasn't cultivated virtuous conduct. Confucius then worries about whether he has imparted all that he has been taught, all that he has learned, and why that is so that those teachings, the learnings, can continue to benefit others. So that's his second worry, that he hasn't imparted all of his teachings. And the third worry for Confucius is that he has learned about the right thing to do, but has failed to put it into practice. He worries that he hasn't aligned his conduct with what is right and conduct himself as he should. So that's his third worry. And last but not least, Confucius is worried that there are faults in himself that he has yet to correct, or that he's unable to correct. So those are Confucius's worries. And because Confucius's worries are quite general, we certainly don't have to be teachers to benefit from sharing the same worries and reflecting on the same questions. So the Analects can make us think about what it is that we're worried about and what we should be worried about. Aside from our thoughts and worries, Confucius in the Analects also offers advice for our words and our actions. Let's take a look. Confucius said, the exemplary person is ashamed to let their words exceed their actions. Here, their words refer to what a person has said about what they're currently doing or what they will do. And their actions refer to what they've actually done, what they have managed to accomplish or achieve. Now, an ethical, principled person would feel ashamed to make exaggerated claims about themselves. And this shame arises from an innate sense of right and wrong. Shame is traditionally valued for keeping oneself from committing misdeeds and for motivating oneself to do better. For example, to be a credit to our family, to the school or university, the company, or the community that we're part of. It could be said that shame is a sign of a healthy conscience, a sign that we care about what others think of us and how our words and deeds might affect their regard for us. Bongre Siok analyzes shame from the perspective of cultural psychology and early Confucian philosophy. He finds that in early Confucian texts like the Analects, shame is not a reactive emotion of an endangered self-image, not a painful and depressive emotion like that accompanies moral failure. Rather, shame is a moral disposition that supports a self-critical and self-transformative process of moral development. The Confucian virtue of shame facilitates self-reflection and self-cultivation. And that is why we find that in the practice of the mean, Confucius said that knowing shame approximates courage, is almost as good as courage. And that's because shame motivates us to improve ourselves rather than cling on to our habits. If the exemplary person is afraid of being ashamed of making false claims, well, they'll be courageous in making good on their promises and practicing what they preach. It takes courage to do what should be done, to do what is right. And one motivator is shame. So why would someone overstate their claims? Well, in advertisements and marketing, we come across exaggerated claims all the time. We've become accustomed to the sales talk and puffery. Everyone knows that those words can't be trusted or relied upon. When the salesperson makes claims that sound too good to be true, we know that they're interested in their own gains, in making a profit more than the consumer's interests. So they lose all credibility. Confucius emphasizes that a person who can't even be trusted to keep their word simply won't go very far. Just compares the person who lacks trustworthiness to the carriage in the cart without the crossbars to which the oxen or the horses are yoked. Those vehicles simply can't be driven. In modern terms, a person that lacks trustworthiness would be like a car without fuel or electricity. Now, Professor Liebingham also makes the point that a person without trustworthiness will seldom have other merits. So one should certainly not show off by saying or promising more than what we're capable of doing. Now, interestingly, the Chinese character for trustworthiness is made up of two parts. On the left, you have the character for person, and on the right is the character for speech. We put the two parts together. It's a bit like a person standing by their words and being able to keep a promise. And clearly, doing what we say, keeping our word, is trustworthiness in a nutshell. So the exemplary person is ashamed to let their words exceed their actions. Now that's something we know not to do. But from a more constructive perspective, Confucius taught that the exemplary person would want to be slow to speak and quick to act. The Master said the exemplary person wishes to be slow in his speech, but prompt in his actions. Yeah, Confucius is talking about the relative response rates of our speech and actions. Ideally, we should be cautious and considered in whatever we do. Elsewhere in the Analects, Confucius refers to the ancients in his time as exemplars of being considered in their speech. Confucius said people in old times, back in the ancient past, they were sparing in their words. They were ashamed to think that their actions might not measure up to their words. And this was a tradition that was established as early as the Zhou dynasty. The founders of the Zhou dynasty that we've already heard of, the Zhou kings, King Wen, King Wu. Now there's a famous story about the young king, King Cheng of Zhou, and one day he pretends to confer a leaf, a tree leaf. Pretends that it's actually a jade tablet, and he confers this leaf to his younger brother, symbolizing the act of conferring a fiefdom, an area of land. Well, the Duke of Zhou, his uncle, sees this child play and then requests the young king to set a date to confer the fiefdom. When the king protests that he was simply, playing or joking, the Duke of Zhou responds that the Son of Heaven does not make flippant remarks. So why is caution in speech a commendable thing? Well, it's really the flip side of a concern with trustworthiness. If trustworthiness is about living up to one's words, well, being careful in one's speech is about making sure that one's words are such that one can live up to them. In both cases, the underlying motive is to be a person who has integrity and a consistency between how they appear to others and how they actually are. Now, the ancients were mindful of saying something, but not being able to do all that they've said. Now, a person can also find it difficult to mean everything that they say, or to ensure that what they've said actually accords with their conscience. As the Analects provides here, Confucius said that one's words are not cause for regret, and this is difficult to do. After all, words can just slip out of our lips so easily. So it's important to take extra care with what we wish to say. Confucius also teaches, and this is in relation to students of law, that we should know when we know something and to know when we don't know. This probably sounds intuitive to most people, but some people do like to claim that they know more than they actually do. Maybe they don't intend or mean to mislead and deceive others, but it's a reflection of their lack of self-awareness. We also know that people can say all sorts of things in the heat of the moment. And often, those words can become a cause for regret. But by then, it could already be too late. As the Chinese proverb goes, once a word is spoken, even a team of 4 horses cannot retrieve it. Now, I couldn't find a picture with 4 horses, so I thought, these 3, we all get the picture. Now, words once spoken obviously can't be retracted, and we could suffer much more than embarrassment. We could be liable for irrevocable losses in terms of our job, our authority, our reputation, our standing within the community. It may be impossible to undo the damage caused by thoughtless words. Compared to our words, you could say no one could fault us for being the first to lend a hand. As they say, a friend in need is a friend indeed. So it makes good sense to be slow to speak or slower to speak and quicker to act. Remember, it's relatively speaking. And obviously, we need to think before we speak or act. Okay. Next topic, too big or small. Confucius said, the exemplary person is not a utensil. A utensil in this context is a tool or a vessel. And utensils tend to be sort of used for one main purpose. Okay, except, for example, a Swiss Army knife. So, for example, a pencil sharpener is generally used to sharpen pencils, right? Or a pot is generally used to cook food. Well, here Confucius distinguishes the exemplary person from utensil objects. And you might be thinking, isn't that a bit obvious? Clearly, a human being, an individual, is not an object. Well, the point is that the exemplary person is a person of upstanding moral character and outstanding skillful competence. Confucius holds the exemplary person up as a positive role model for all learners to aspire towards, because those individuals have so much to contribute. Now, we can think of them as a bit like a Swiss Army knife. They're not simply a talented all-rounder. They're capable of great things, even landmark achievements. Just as a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, those wonderful, great accomplishments are often made up of years, long years of quiet, obscure, and thankless efforts. The point is that the exemplary person will approach those smaller or day-to-day tasks with the same patience, diligence, and conscientious efforts. They can do and will do whatever it takes to bring benefit to their community. And they're not utensils in the sense that they don't limit themselves to a particular role or a particular task. And Confucius tells us that we shouldn't either. Now, this is not to suggest that the manager of the company must also take on the job of his secretary, their secretary. But the manager could apply their management skills to contribute more broadly beyond their day job. So I think that we should never underestimate the capacity to serve our fellow beings on this planet. In fact, it's been said that perhaps when we use our gifts to leave this earth a bit better than we found it, that we realize the meaning or purpose of our life. And this might sound rather abstract, but I think that the exemplary person that Confucius is talking about here can be found in the many unsung heroes that we know. For example, parents. Parents are a child's first teachers in life. On a day-to-day basis, parents are called upon to be their family's chef, teacher, nurse, doctor, entertainer, sports coach, tooth fairy, Santa Claus, even a walking encyclopedia, and much more besides. There are no holidays to being a parent. Day in, day out, and around the clock, mums and dads selflessly nurture their children, the young children, with infinite patience and loving kindness. Parents give their children so much, and they seek only that their children grow up healthy and happy and able to make a positive contribution to our world. Indeed, it's often through our parents' living example of true love that we can learn and know how to love and care for others. So the exemplary person is not a utensil. There's no need to limit ourselves to a particular role or task or even time and place. Even our best friends are there for us in our hour of need, whether day or night. So each and every individual can make a world of difference just by applying their strengths with the right attitude and developing their innate virtues. So that's no job too big or small. We can trace a common theme running through the passages that we've looked at so far. Confucius urges us to focus our attentions and concerns beyond ourselves. Instead of worrying about achieving a position or fame, we're to focus on whether we're qualified, whether we have what it takes in terms of upstanding character and outstanding ability to merit a position or to deserve recognition in the first place. Instead of worrying about others not knowing or understanding us, we should be worried about whether or not we know and understand others. Instead of selfishly thinking, what's in it for me, Confucius encourages us to ask what it is that we can do for others. As for our words and the tendency of some people to talk big, Confucius reminds us to be responsible for our words. Do we really mean to say those things? Can we keep those promises? Again, taking the time to think first and be a bit more careful and considered in our language can make a world of difference. Because how a person treats others inevitably impacts on the way that they're treated in return. It's a bit like the boy who cried wolf. And the teller of tall tales will lose all credibility very quickly. On the other hand, just by being a bit more thoughtful and considerate with our words, we can build and maintain positive and constructive relationships with those around us. Now, the same attitude applies to service. Do we just complete the job that we're asked to do, and clock off at 5? Or do we think about how to do our jobs a bit better? It's the difference between a job done and a job well done. What makes the difference? Well, I'd suggest it starts with not worrying about our personal gain or self-interest, but having a genuine concern to serve and contribute to the well-being of others, those around us. So I've summarised here the themes that we've come across, about position, whether we're recognised, about our speech, and not being a vessel. And if we notice that the questions in bold, they extend our caring and consideration and really puts us in the driver's seat. We can actually do something about those questions. Now, Confucius calls out the common preoccupation with self-interest and personal gain in the Analects. In the following passages, for example, he emphasizes that the true scholar, the person who is truly committed to working on their moral excellence, developing their moral excellence, they're not preoccupied with material comforts like food and clothes and house and home. Confucius said, if a scholar aspires to the way of the highest learning, but is ashamed to wear poor clothes and eat poor food, they're not worth engaging in a serious discussion. The scholar who's attached to the amenities of his home, the comforts of his home, they're not fit to be a scholar. Now, who wouldn't want to eat fine food and wear fine clothes and live in a beautiful house? It's not that the true scholar doesn't enjoy those things. They can certainly make use of those resources, but the real focus of their attention lies elsewhere. In other words, that's not the reason why they get up in the morning. What gets them up in the morning? Well, those true scholars, they want everyone, including themselves, to be able to live and work in peace and to have all they need. And so they pursue the highest learning. They strive to develop their ethical characters. They upskill themselves and they try to set the right example in what they say and what they do. At the end of the day, their learning and their life starts and ends with how they can do better for the world around them. So clearly, there's more to life than material comforts. Now, this is the final passage of the Analects today that I'd like to cover, and I think it draws together very neatly the different strands that we've explored. Confucius said, an exemplary person doesn't seek to gratify their appetite in eating, nor comfort in their dwelling. If they're attentive to matters and careful with words and correct themselves by reference to those who follow the way, then they may be said to love learning. So here, Confucius points out that for the exemplary person, there are more important things than what's nice to eat or where's nice to live. Food and shelter are certainly essentials, that's a fact. But the exemplary person is not preoccupied with those matters. They're more interested in cultivating their moral character and using their learning to contribute to society. Now, in a statecraft text called The Essentials of Bringing About Order from Assembled Texts, we find the cautionary tale of Lord Huan of the state of Qi, and it comes from the spring and autumn period of China's history. Now, Lord Huan was the first hegemon and a new balance of power that emerged as the authority of the Zhou court declined. Now, he had a trusted advisor, a chancellor of the state of Qi by the name of Guanzhong. Now, before Guanzhong passed away, Guanzhong advised Lord Huan to distance himself from 4 self-interested individuals. And this was because those individuals would indulge the Lord's selfish pleasures in food and women, etc. And so Guanzhong sort of used his last words of remonstration. He was deathly ill on his deathbed, to advise the Lord to distance himself from such harmful characters. After Guanzhong passes away, Lord Huan unfortunately fails to take his advice. Well, in one account, Lord Huan does initially dismiss those 4 self-interested individuals, but he soon finds that his food isn't quite to his taste, etc., etc., and he succumbs to doubt as to the correctness of Guanzhong's advice, and eventually he reappoints those 4 individuals. Well, whether or not he tries to follow the advice, in any event, Lord Huan surrounds himself with those 4 individuals, and he becomes manipulated by them. They soon turn against him and take control. As a result, the whole state, the state of Qi, suffers political turmoil as various parties, attack each other in vying for the throne. In the end, Lord Huan expires from illness, alone and unattended in his room in an empty palace. No one dared to coffin his corpse, and his dead body remained in his room until maggots appeared in the doorway. It could be said that the self-indulgence of Lord Huan was the root cause for this miserable ending. It distracted him from the affairs of the state, and it ultimately led him suffering not just the loss of his rulership, but ultimately the loss of his life. Now, if we compare Lord Huan of Qi to Lord Mu of Zhou, who we mentioned earlier, both had top jobs in being a state ruler. They had the position, they had the name and fame. Now, whereas Lord Mu is known for being self-disciplined, not indulging in fine food, fine clothes, etc. He seems to me to be the type to, as long as he had something to eat, place to stay, he would focus his energies on serving the state. And we know that he was very magnanimous, very generous, and he dedicated himself to serving the people. Well, he's left a lasting reputation for serving the state in the history books. Lord Huan of Qi, on the other hand, seemed more interested in his selfish pleasures, and I suppose his ending speaks for itself. Now, overall, I could say we've covered some tips and advice from the Analects, and hopefully there are some use and relevance, and there is so much more. The book has been called a Bible, and it's simply a timeless treasure trove, a trove of timeless perspectives and timely reminders for life and work today. Now, as our time on the Analects comes to an end in this series of talks, you may wish to pick up the book and read for yourself. Perhaps there will be another opportunity later on to read more of the Analects together another time. Next week, we'll start reading the Practice of the Mean, and Catherine and I are very much looking forward to it. So, see you then.